Okay, welcome back. We have a new inspiring story. And actually, this one is a good friend of mine, and she has just completed her book, and it is ready for launch. And let me tell you a little bit about the book. The book is called When Sex Meets God, and is written by uh, Deborah Lukovich, uh, Dr. Deborah Lukovich. She has a PhD in depth psychology and a, to me, a fantastic person and a wonderful brain. But Deborah never set out to write a memoir, but when her life and sense of identity began to unravel, it coincided with her surprising calling to study depth psychology. Her research and her lived experience merged during a collision of spirituality and sexuality, leading to the soul level transformation that what founded was an unleashing creativity, meaning, and purpose. Today, uh, Deborah is a depth psychology coach and author. She has written other books. Your Soul is Talking. Are You Listening? And through her podcast, yes, she even does a podcast too. A Dose of Depth, writing and coaching, she empowers others to explore unconscious forces shaping their lives. Her story is deeply personal, but the journey she shares is universal. Let me tell you. Okay, so got the honor of getting an advance copy of the book, and it floored me that for my own story uh, of learning to, one, like myself, and two, learning to love myself, because there are two completely different things. And maybe we'll get into a little bit about that with Deborah. But it was just amazing. Some of the things that she talked about is like, I knew exactly where she was going with it. It was like, it was an amazing book to read. And you should go to Amazon uh, as soon as you finish listening to this podcast and buy the book. Or check out DeborahLudovic.com, and you'll see that that web address in our description of the podcast either way. So anyway, without any further talking, go grab those snacks quickly because we are going to get started having coffee with Deborah and talking about her book, When Sex Meets God.
Everything to me. Oh, oh, oh. Strange and solitary, united after birth.
Well, Deborah, actually, it's good afternoon, isn't it?
It is.
You're like 2 hours behind me, and it's like 2 o'clock there. Anyway,
It is a very typical fall day in Wisconsin today. Overcast, a little windy, a little rain.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I will say that it is a typical November day in Vancouver. Clouds, rain. Yeah.
Kind of the same, yeah.
Anyway, I loved your book.
Thank you.
I found myself at times being very aligned with what you were saying because, well, we grew up in the same time era together, right? Yes.
Yeah. The 80s.
And
Yeah.
not being the because you are not the conventional female, nor am I the conventional male. Uh,
True.
and we were it, okay, off camera. We were kind of discussing depth psychology versus quantum theory, and and it may not have been a technical conversation, but it was definitely a very understood conversation because it you
Yes.
get
Yes.
it.
Not only that, I'll raise you. Depth psychology, quantum theory, spirituality, and neuroscience, and the sort of kind of reckoning that's going on in the world right now, all intersecting.
Yes, it's a huge collision. It's a beautiful
Yes.
collision too. I'm
Hmm.
really,
Yes.
in some respects, I'm enjoying the watching people waking up,
Yeah.
uh, and and the time that's actually happening. So
Yeah.
anyway, I mean, you talk a little bit about what inspired you to start writing your memoirs, and I would say that your memoirs is not a egotistical sort of thing. It's a reflection.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well, okay. Really, the reason that I felt compelled to write my book was that I thought my experience was so ridiculous that I just had to write about it. Like, I just thought I had these two moments when my life was falling apart. And one of them was, okay, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I'll be stronger after I go through this complete unraveling. And then the other one was, oh my gosh, I'm in that movie. Oh my gosh, that movie about the alcoholic husband and this. I'm like, oh my God, my life is a movie. And so what I didn't realize it because I wasn't studying depth psychology yet, was that was my way of getting distance from my own experience. So I didn't realize it, right? Like spiritually, we talk
mhm.
about slipping into the role of observer. So I didn't know that I had this natural, I guess, defense mechanism because if I wouldn't have done that, like created that sort of context for my falling apart, I mean, I could have, been depressed. And then the other thing was that I had to find a strange sense of humor. So my quirky humor today isn't really the same as it was before I had my falling apart. So it just was so odd and ironic what happened to me. Now, if my falling apart hadn't have paralleled this weird irrational calling to go pursue a master's PhD in depth psychology at age 48, I don't know what would have happened, right? So, right from the beginning, I lived the framework I was learning. And I thought that's even strange too. And then the fact that I also thought, what am I going to research for a PhD? And then that was brought to me as well. I thought I was going to study education from a depth psychology perspective. Oh no. My second quarter at a residential, when we were sharing, well, what are you going to write your paper on? And I was like, so embarrassed. I felt like I was coming out of the closet and I said, I think I want to study, I think I want to write about the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon. And then I was like, oh my gosh, how non-academic. Did I just say that? And thank goodness my professor was like, I see there's a lot of energy there for you. I think you should follow that. So then that led me to sort of the sex and God. Like I didn't know I was being led. So the first part of my life, I was very masculine oriented, goal oriented. I had to let all of that go and just sort of follow these strange, vulnerable little breadcrumbs. So that's what I ended up exploring women's experience of reconciling sexuality and spirituality through Jung's theory of individuation. And when I clicked submit for my dissertation, immediately within that week, I vomited out 50,000 words into a Word document about all the more personal, juicy experiences that were not appropriate or needed in my research. because what happened to me personally was one of the texts in research that I studied, that I analyzed, besides what is everybody else saying about sexuality and spirituality, etc. My own personal experience became part of what I studied. So it just happened to me and it just came out. And I mean, it was 5 years though. I didn't really know how to write a story. So
Well, you didn't know how to read a story.
no, no, I learned how to be a scholarly writer, right? My PhD. Then what I vomited out into the page was really just memories. And it was memories. A lot of them were about the man, right? My first post-divorce romance. And because it was just so, what happened was crazy and swept up and out of control and all of this. And I just had to write about it. And then when I left my hometown, because my life kept falling apart, and I'm like, I got to get out of here. I I didn't know how I was going to earn a living. I was living near my sister, so I had that sort of security. And in my email box popped up this email from The Right Practice. So I'm always promoting The Right Practice because they'll always have a special place in my heart. And I just kept having synchronistic experiences with them. I signed up for one program, and their programs are very affordable. And then another program, and then another program. And I met all these writers, and I learned how to tell a story. But it took me 5 years, and I discovered that I learn in layers. So at first, I just wrote stuff. And then, based on feedback, people start asking me questions like, why did you stay married for 25 years? I was like, oh, good question. I guess I need to some backstory so that people understand how I came to make certain decisions, right? And why I am, what lessons did that lead to? So I didn't know how to write a story. And a good memoir is written like a novel,
Yeah,
not like a biography, right? And
no,
so, I probably, oh my gosh, I bet 10 to 15 drafts of my story before I finalized it.
yeah.
And 35 to 50 people who read it and proofread and helped me with editing. And I just, at one point I was impatient. And Joe Bunting, the founder of The Right Practice, will say, you know, there's this like tension between making it perfect, because a lot of writers, I guess, have perfection complexes. So letting that go, but at the same time, listening to your tuition that says it's not ready yet. It's
Yeah,
not ready. So I would go through spurts where I would, over 2 months, I'd get through all the chapters and do, I call it a layer of revisions and editing. And then I would just set it aside and I would get mad at myself for not returning to it, but it needed to percolate, like something needed to percolate. So writing a memoir and a personal story. So not only just what do you share, and do you have enough distance from your story so that you do come across as it's not an ego project, right?
yeah.
So, that's probably why it took me 5 years to write, because I just lived this and I studied it, and I needed time to be able to write about it as if yes, it's my story, but it isn't my story. It's a universal story. So, yeah, it was a long process.
Well, storytelling is a long process, and
Yeah.
uh, from one storyteller to another. That when I'm actually immersed into telling someone's story, I well, my wife will tell you that it can be quite involved in I disappear in you know until something happens, right? And then all of a sudden something snaps and it's like blurp, it comes out. It's like almost I don't want to say giving birth, but
Well, you can use that metaphor. I mean, think about it. It is a creative birthing process,
yeah,
and it is the feminine, the unconscious, the womb, where
right,
there's chaos of creativity happening. And then there's the masculine mind that helps you articulate it in a certain form.
yeah,
And it's the partnership between the two then.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah. So I do have because you it took me until I was almost 50 to understand a couple things
Mhm.
that I spent most of my life, and it seemed that you also spent most of your life trying to figure out why you should even like yourself. So at
I
what point did you figure out that you didn't have to ask the world's permission to like yourself, nor did you actually have to ask the world's permission to love yourself?
so I would say I never had that problem. I've always liked me.
Mm-hmm.
That really wasn't my issue. I think that and this is, I write about this in my book. So it's a chapter called Mixed Messages.
Yeah.
So yeah, so my mother sent me off into the world with two messages. One was that, and this probably was a function of the times, that she said to my two sisters and me, "You guys can do anything you want. Go after it, whatever you want." In fact, when I was fit, no, I guess I was in my 40s, she was still waiting for me to run to be president of the United States. She's like, you could be president. And I had a life transformation coach say to me, "Wow, that's a lot of pressure." And I looked at her sideways. I'm like, "No, I just think she believed in me." But I thought, whoa, did I internalize that as pressure? Right? Because nothing's ever quite good enough. I have to keep achieving, right? So that was interesting. But the other message was an invisible message, and it was her undermining of me because, and I came to understand that she needed, because of her own traumatic upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
she needed external validation, right? And so, before her death, she said to me, "I just knew I had to be a better mother." Well, when you're a parent, how do you know if you're being a good parent? You can't judge your parent, right? You can't judge your parenting solely by your child's behavior because children are normal, right? They're not supposed to be well behaved all the time. We don't grow and expand by being perfect, right? And so if she needed to prove to herself that she was a good parent, the only way that she knew to do that was to look to my behavior, right? And so if I wasn't behaving, then that was a reflection on her. So I internalized that responsibility. So I really wasn't free to express negative emotions because that would have an impact on her, right? She tells this story. This isn't in the book. It's just a silly little story, but she would tell the story about how when I was in kindergarten and she went to parent teacher conferences and the teacher said, "Debbie," that's what I was called as a child. "Debbie she doesn't want to paint because she's afraid. She doesn't want to get her dress dirty. She doesn't want to get anything dirty." And when my mom would retell that story, she would just laugh and think it was so funny. And then later on, I started thinking, well, yeah, I was terrified at what you were going to say or do. And I was not physically abused, just verbally undermined all the time. Um, yes, how could I take risk wrecking my dress and disappointing you, right? So I always thought it was funny that she thought that was a funny story. And eventually I was like, that's a sad story. That's not funny that I didn't want to get dirty. So of course, how did I overcompensate as a parent? I loved when my kids got dirty. I was like, "You go play in the mud all you want. You paint my patio door, you whatever you want to do," because I really wasn't allowed to have even sort of normal freedom of expression as a child. So to get back to your question, that's not what I discovered. I never had a self-worth issue. And a lot of women will assume that that's the issue for most women. And it really wasn't. I was quite confident in myself, but I was also always sort of undermining or like, this isn't quite good enough, or why can't I do this? Right. So then what did I find out when I unraveled? Well, I found out that I over adapt, right,
Hmm.
to the needs of others. So it wasn't that I didn't like myself. So for example, in my marriage, I always found a way to pursue what I wanted to pursue, but many times it was outside of our marriage. And my former husband had his own interests as well, and it was the 80s. So it was kind of like in vogue that, as a healthy couple, we weren't so needy and possessive of each other. So it kind of worked until we became parents. And then I ended up, shouldering most of the burden. But so it's funny because why did I stay in this relationship, right? Because I think I stayed as long as I did because I was always able to meet my needs, right? Either as an activist, or I started a nonprofit, or I helped bring back the beach, or I was the Girl Scout troop leader, or I started a business that I was able to compensate for maybe what was missing in my relationship. And actually that's really what the root of polyamory is, right? People think polyamory is about sexual partners, and it's really
Right.
not. Polyamory means many loves. So, so many couples project the meeting of all their needs onto their partner when that's not possible. Sometimes they might have a same-sex friend that's into depth psychology and quantum theory, and so they share this kind of passion, this sort of intellectual, erotic attachment to these ideas, but it's not, but that's all it is, right? But if you don't have a strong relationship, then that might be perceived as a threat, to the other person. So that's kind of long answer to your question, but that's kind of what I figured out is that I was, um,
It's a depth psychology answer to the
yeah, I mean,
question.
I explain, or the way that I explain it is that, and I think most people are in this situation, is that the first part of my life, I lived like a business plan, right? So
Hmm.
if my emotions had to be very controlled, I had a very strong persona, meaning, and I'm an INFJ, introverted, intuitive, feeling judger person, which means I'm only 3% of the population and we're the most mysterious. So no one really knows INFJs unless they take the time to dig. Like you dig, like you, right? Most people don't really do that, and most people also aren't as complicated, right? So, yeah, so I forgot where I was going with that, but
Well, it's kind of funny that because I've had people because I'm an introvert.
Mhm.
Okay.
Same.
And somebody said, "Oh, well, that's just so horrible that you can't feel free and to be extrovert." And I said, "Well, I don't understand what you mean." And I looked at them like, because I didn't understand what they were saying. And introverted to me means that you have to be alone to recharge your batteries.
Yeah, that's all it means.
It's like, and they were
That's all
putting
it means.
some bullying thing because, or, all right, yes, I do always champion the bully, but or the bullied, should I say?
Yeah,
Because that didn't come exactly enunciate correctly.
yeah.
Uh, but but that's because I was always bullied. But it's me wishing that somebody would have been there when I was being slapped around. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so I do that for others. But that has nothing to do with me being bullied. Has nothing at all to do with me being introverted. So and
No, so
in
yeah,
that's why I had to dig deeper. It's like, well, how do you recharge yourself?
yeah. So, so that's Jungian theory. Myers-Briggs is based on Carl Jung's theory of psychological types.
Mhm.
So introversion and extroversion it's exactly what you said. It's how do you refuel and re-energize. Has nothing to do with whether you're shy. Now, some introverts are shy, but I'm an introvert. I'm not shy, but I am as an introverted intuitive. So combining introversion means that I am refueled by going by my inner world, where an extrovert is energized by the external world. Like
Yeah.
after a whole day of team building, An introvert wants to go debrief with a glass of wine, but an extrovert wants to go bowling with 20 people because
Yeah.
that's energizing to them. Now, an introvert can be energized by being with people or by an extroverted activity, but it's how they're relating to it with their inner world that is energizing. So, for example, if I'm having a conversation, for example, networking. So, an introvert is less likely to do speed networking. An introvert is going to be like, I just want to make a deep connection with one person. And that might feel really satisfying. And an extrovert will be like, how many people can I they just live a little bit more on the surface. An extrovert that looks at a beautiful sunset or sunrise experiences it out there and also sees it as an objective event that everyone kind of sees the same way. An introvert that looks like a sunset will eventually be like, oh, 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 like their inner world is just stimulated. And soon their experience of the sunset actually changes the experience. So, an introvert, I wrote a whole book about, which was basically somebody's dissertation about the experience of introversion. And an introvert is interested in their experience of experiencing things. And that probably makes sense to you, but to an
Yeah.
extrovert, they're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean your experience of experiencing things? And then that changes your experience of things.
Yeah.
So that is like some of the differences between an introvert and an extrovert.
Yeah. And that also reflects in how you do and in your body of work uh, because when I look at your body of work, it's like your podcasts and all that kind of stuff. You every time you produce an episode, it's like, oh, what more did she learn today?
Right? It's a bottomless. My client and I have been seeing him a week for 3 years, every week for 3 years, and he gets it now. He's like, every time I'm like, nope, I'm good. We end up going someplace. I'm like, holy crap, I didn't even know this was possible, like this meaning. And speaking of psychological types, if we wanted to bring it back to the book,
Yeah,
in when I after after I get divorced and I do some online dating and I get swept up, right? I get swept up in a really irrational romance with a younger man. And um, because I'm already studying depth psychology, I say, and he's 33 and I'm 50 at the time, and I say, "Hey, will you do your Myers-Briggs?" And he's like, "Yeah." So he was that kind of guy that, yeah, he wanted to learn about himself too. And I'm an INFJ. He was an ENFP, which is the sort of the opposite.
hmm,
And so the relationship, which means that we would either be really great and complement each other, or many people who, find their opposite, what they don't understand is the attraction to the opposite is their unconscious saying, I want you to be a little like that. I want you to have a little bit of that trait. I want you to feel free to be a little bit. But what happens in most cases is people don't change. They actually become more entrenched. And then what initially attracted them to each other, sometimes they end up being resentful of those very things that they were attracted to. So that's what usually happens. But with this person, I was like, I have no idea why I'm so swept up and so attracted to this man. But I was like, oh, yeah, he's an extrovert. Like he's a P. So the last letter, judging really is not being judgmental. It's that you're sort of more purpose oriented. Like there has to be a reason that you're doing things. Even if it's like, I'm choosing to have fun today, it's like you have a reason. A perceiver, is they just have an insatiable appetite to like meander through life. And so at the time, after living the way that I had in a kind of very hyper masculine business planning approach and
yeah,
having to let all that go, that is very uncomfortable, right? To go to basically not knowing losing your sense of direction, have an identity crisis. And so I adopt, like, he used this word meander. And I was like, oh my, it just made me want to kiss him. Like, what is that word? What does meander mean? It means not, can you just look at me? Like, I'm like, oh, meander is just this freedom to just walk around without having an agenda, without needing to achieve a goal. Now, he was sort of bordering on the dark side of meandering through life, right? But he really was opposite in that way. So, at one part of the book, I start reflecting about, how we had some similarities in our childhood, but yet his psychological type, they manifested in a different way, in a more extroverted way than an introvert, right? So an introvert, you know bullied maybe, but also suffering in quiet, right? So an introvert, sometimes people don't know that you're suffering. An extrovert, like, let's say it's a boy extrovert, he's just going to go out and, like, his energy, the whatever the pent up energy is, it's going to be directed outward, and it will be called misbehavior, right? And but he's suffering too, right? He suffered
Right.
too. So in the book, and this is told in a very amusing, entertaining, and also dramatic way. But I really am sort of, because of this odd calling to go study depth psychology while I'm experiencing this, I can have a framework, because if I wouldn't have had the depth psychology framework, I might have not said yes to that crazy relationship,
It
right?
sounded like a fun relationship, though.
But
So,
my hyper responsibility would have probably said, no, I don't have time for that. That's irresponsible. He's
mhm.
what, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, but it sounded like it sounded fun, and it also sounded needed.
Yes, yes. So yes, our relationship very much was a vessel for transformation that sort of started with sexuality and then moved on to spirituality.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so, Mhm.
For the sake of time, uh, and there's a whole for those people who need purpose. What's the underlying purpose for writing the book?
Well, as depth psychologists, we automatically realize that we don't really know the ultimate purpose for why we do things, why we research what we research, why we write our book. Um, I see layers of purpose, and I don't think I've discovered all of them yet because it's new, right? And I think this is the kind of book that will make its way into people's hands organically. Like, I'm already hearing people say, "Hey, yeah, my colleague, she's curious about your book," or my sister said that, and my sister sounded surprised, right? And another person was like, "Yeah, I was on a train with somebody from Milwaukee and I told him about this." Or my client was like, "Yeah, I had a convert," because of his own inner work. He was kind of surprised about somebody who showed up at one of the places that he owns and the conversation that they had that went away that it wouldn't have gone a year ago. And then he brought my book in and my story, and the guy is like, "Oh my gosh, like this seems like a synchronicity. Like this was the purpose of this conversation, was for you to tell me about this book," right? So I don't know, and I don't pretend to know. I know that I know that right away after all of that, and when I was done with the dissertation, I knew I wanted to write a memoir. The title came to me. It's never changed. It's kind of like two people meet up. One's called sex, one's called God. Like, and then they have a relationship and what happens. And I knew that eventually I wanted the story to become like some kind of Netflix series or other platform or a movie, because I know my personal experience
Mhm.
is just one version of a universal experience that many people are having or are on the verge of having, but they don't have a framework for how to prepare. Because if you don't have a framework for how to make meaning, number one, you might not have the courage to say yes to the journey, to the hero's journey, because it involves a falling apart and a dismemberment process. And without a framework, like, oh, okay, yep, I'm living that myth, I'm living that movie, you could drop into depression, not
Yeah.
understanding that the deeper meaning of depression is your unconscious trying to get you to explore something, right? Yes, we don't want to be depressed. Maybe we need some substance to help us. But really, the deeper meaning of the depression is your unconscious saying, there's something else for you in life, but you might not be brave enough, right, to walk into the unknown.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that I learned when you fall apart and you have to get to a point where you surrender and then you sense the transcendent saying, hey, I've been here all along. Where have you been? You just haven't welcomed me. And that doesn't have to be God. It can be the quantum realm, nature, whatever. Then, you know, that takes courage because then you realize now you're co-creating. And when you co-create, you're not in charge. And
No,
so you have to develop a capacity for uncertainty and a trust in the process. And that can be terrifying.
but we have to it sometimes embrace the terrifying.
Well, of course we do. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that some people can't and some people won't. And it's for the brave. That journey's for the brave. But you do come out the other end. You
Well,
do. So I always had that core belief. Now, not everybody has that core belief, right? That, yeah, I'll survive
I
this.
thought of that.
No, no, not everybody
Everybody
has that.
is
Not everybody has that core belief that I'll figure it out.
yeah. Well, that was one of the things that was handed to me from growing up is that um, you're part of this family and you will always survive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was my mother's way of you know, I in a lot of ways you talk about when we talk about the undermining, right? That was one of her
Yeah.
ways of saying, well, hey, yeah, I undermined you over here, here, and here, but you'll survive it, so it'll be okay. So,
Yeah, so those mixed messages. I think a lot of
yeah,
our parents give us mixed messages. Some parents only give limiting messages. So those are the people. So you and I are similar in that we had both of those messages. And so what I learned was I have achieved because of one of the messages, and I've cut myself short because of the other one. So this book and this business is really kind of a test to see that I have overcome the sort of limiting message because that's my self-imposed. At this point, I can't blame my mother for that, right? Now that I know I have that undermining limiting belief, I have to overcome it, right? I have to do what I have to do to overcome it. And I think I am, but those patterns are very stubborn. So, Carl Jung liked the spiral, and actually the garden auger is a better symbol of the process of individuation. That's the theory that you could say my story tracks. You wouldn't know it. You don't know you're getting a depth psychology experience unless you know these concepts because it's just told like a story. But a garden auger, what does it do? It goes down, it pulls up some dirt, right, to make a hole for a bulb.
right,
It goes down, it brings up a little more dirt, it goes down. And so, when you get your first aha, what Iyanla Van Zant, I was reading her book before I was studying depth psychology. What did you learn about love as a child? And I was like, gosh, I really don't know. Journal, 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 journal. Oh my gosh, I learned that love is conditional.
right.
Whoa. what does that mean? How did that play itself out in my life? That love is conditional. Like that was just like, I had no idea. I had no idea. Now I can make sense of how I showed up in my marriage. Well, guess what? I will circle back to that parental complex, but it will never be as dramatic or negative as it was. It loses its power, but now you're going to be forced, and Hermes the trickster will probably trick you into a situation where you're like, oh, there it is again. There's my mother wound. There's my mother complex. Now, what am I supposed to be learning now? What's the deeper understanding? And in this theory, as you come into relationship with your personal complexes, this is the beauty of where some people go, is they are being called to the universal realm. So until you can release and bring some emotional neutrality to your personal victimhood, you're not ready to be swept up by the archetypal energies, which want to use you to expand consciousness in the collective. And so from the beginning, some of my clients, I can see that's where we're going. And other clients, it's okay. They just stay in the personal realm and they have sort of an influence. They show up in the world differently, they attract different people into their lives, and their life is much improved. And then, but for some, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're Artemis. I can tell you're the Artemis myth.
Mm, yeah, it's. I imagine you dealing with your clients. It's like you get to see and experience a lot of different types of people, and
Yeah, I mean,
it's gonna
that's
be fun.
yes, that's a mystery because, who shows up? Like, how do they, how do I get these clients, right? And over time, they have changed. The type of client has changed. And I have my favorite kinds of situations. But I have to say, like, um, some of my clients have been seeing me for 5 years. And it's just a bottomless pit. And I sometimes can see they'll get to a point where I'm like, what? Did you just say that? Do you know that 6 months ago you would have never said that? And they're like, what? What? I've always been like this. I mean, I just love it. So, like, it makes my day. I know exactly what to do in a virtual session with a client. And then after the session, I'll be like, I don't know what to do. What? I don't know what to do unless I'm in a session. It just comes so like I drop into a space where I'm co-creating
Yeah,
with, because not only with what's in the collective unconscious, but, Carl Jung said that even between you and me, there's four conversations happening. We're communicating mind to
right.
mind to your unconscious, your mind to my unconscious, but the most fun is between our unconscious at a level that we don't really know what's going on. And maybe 2 days later, something happens to you and you're like, oh my God, that's what she was talking about, or whatever. Like most of the communication is happening in the unconscious realm. So yeah, so I love when my clients will send me a text in between sessions about, well, one client this week, she's young, she's in her 30s, and she's got a big brain, and she's Artemis to me. And she's dealing with a lot, trying to get a hold of her parental complexes, all make sense of all her reactions and stuff like that. And we had a session. I said, I'm feeling like you should paint. And she paints anyway. And so later that night, she sent me four of her paintings, watercolor paintings. I was like, did you do that in order? Because you could see that there was a progression in what was being processed in her unconscious and how it got communicated through the paintings. And I actually just posted a blog post about it, and she let me share those particular paintings. But, it's so mysterious. Just most of the work is like, and just because you're not aware of everything happening doesn't mean it's still not like causing you to like pivot or make a different choice, right? So, yes, it's fun. Even the sobbing is fun.
It just sounds like fun, you know.
It's
Uh,
rich. It's full of depth. Yeah.
yeah. Well, see that that the title of depth psychology told me a lot right there. Like, oh, because I've been to therapy.
Mhm.
You know, traumatic things have happened.
Mhm.
I got divorced. That was a huge trauma
Yeah.
because, well, we're both recovering Roman Catholics, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, oh, you're damned to hell for getting divorced, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I had to deal with that.
Yeah.
And being the first person in my family to get divorced, uh,
Mm.
after in, I should say, I was the second person to correct that. As the second person to get divorced because I encouraged my mother to get divorced from my father because of things that he was just going this way. It's like you need to get away from that.
Yeah.
So I dropped her off at a lawyer and got her to do it.
Wow.
Yeah. So then when I got divorced, I'm like, oh, wait, I've done this. Oh my God, I really am going to hell. Because, well, Sister Mary came back in this big, bold face.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh,
And anybody who's ever gone to Catholic school, they understand who Sister Mary truly is, not
yeah.
just the name, but who she is. Like, we all had that one nun, right?
Yeah.
So, uh, so yeah, trying to figure
You,
myself
yeah.
out from there, it was quite interesting. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, a depth perspective is it's different. You know, one of my friend, Jungian analyst, Vlado Schultz, I've interviewed him like 3 times. So I have a lot of podcast interviews with him. And one of them was about his article titled Three Ways of Why. And so you can look at a like usual conventional therapy is sort of, well, let's answer the question of like why? You know, why are you feeling this way? Why do you act like this, right? And so there to a certain extent there is a sort of going back, not to re-experience trauma, but to find out like, okay, what is the root of this behavior? Because something happened a long time ago and you responded to it in a certain way. And what happens is that, you know, we choose a response that either avoids pain or seeks validation. And then we develop personality traits that are doing that. And then that some of them become problematic later on, right? And so in a marriage, and especially when we become parents, our parental complexes just get triggered. And then during any time of stress, your parental complexes get triggered. So conventional therapy like is about sort of untangling that and then but it is sort of it seems to me you know focused on a solution, right? So okay, how can we get you out of pain and minimize suffering? And how can we teach you how to sort of replace some limiting beliefs and have new beliefs? Well, what happens with depth is, okay, why is this happening right now? What, that's the deeper question. Okay, why after being married for 24 years? Why not 10? Why not 15? Why is now the time? Well, that's harder to answer. What is it that I'm supposed to be learning right now? What is the meaning of my experiences? And also circling back to the trauma, the gold, the ointment, the ingredient for the ointment is in the wound, right? So we don't go back to re-experience the wound, but we do go back to see like what is the key is there, the treasure is there, the piece of gold is there to bring back for why now, and what does this have to do with my life now? What's the metaphor? And then in you know, individuation theory is about our self, capital S, and our psyche is prompting us to unfold into this blueprint, right? Not a specific, it's not destiny, right? But is like a unfoldment, an emergence. What is emerging, right? Like how is consciousness continuing to express itself through us in a way that contributes to the collective. Now that's the uncertainty. I don't know, right? But without the first part of the work, the personal, the first why, and then the second, finding the metaphor, you won't trust in how you're being pulled mysteriously forward. So you go from having specific goals to, as Michael Bernard Beckwith says, what is emerging from me? And you're like, I'm not sure. I don't know, but I sense this, I sense that. And that's not the mind anymore. So that's the body and the intuition. So it's like you're reversing. Um, so anyway, now I'm getting off track with my story again. But
Yeah. Sorry. So, but with everything you just said about depth psychology,
mhm.
how did they get poured into your book?
Honestly, what's really interesting is I did not. Okay, so my first book that I published after receiving my PhD was a nonfiction book, and it's called Your Soul is Talking. Are you listening? And it's my first book and only book that's just kind of like, here's how your unconscious speaks to you. So it's very accessible. It's not intellectual at all. It's like, dreams. Here's why dreams are a way your unconscious is speaking to you. Here's how your emotional reactions. Here's how depression, anxiety, or obsessive compulsive disorder. Here's how that is your unconscious like speaking to you, trying to get you to explore something. And so that one I wrote and published in 90 days. Like that was like a easy book for me to write. So then when it came to the memoir, I didn't set out to to write it in a way that reflected that psychology. But what I discovered was that, all of my journaling, all my images, and in the book, because you've read it, is infused my experiences with images,
Mhm.
synchronicity. I talk about, oh, I journaled this, right? Dreams, movies. Jungian film theory is a whole thing. So for me, films really spoke to me a lot. And it it just it's just writing about my story sort of reaffirmed Carl Jung's theory of individuation, that it sort of happened that way. And so when you read it, if you're a Jungian, you'll recognize that it tracks, but it wasn't written to follow a depth psychology theory. It was written as a story that happens to reaffirm this theory of individuation. And then in the back, I have a lot of discussion questions, reflection questions, book club questions. And the questions are underneath different themes, but that sort of can get you, you know, get you it does like end up offering you kind of a framework, I think, especially if you go to the discussion questions. And if you look at my images, you can see, wow, if I put these side by side, I can see the progression in
Right.
Deborah's journey.
Hmm.
So that's a long answer to your question. So I didn't set out to do it, but it ended up, and then in the end, I did want to make sure that I was like, that was a thread underneath the surface,
Right.
but it
Okay.
just ended up that way.
Well, it just seemed to be there, but maybe it's because um, we've been friends for a number of years, also.
I don't know. Or maybe I'm a good storyteller.
Hey, there's an idea.
Oh, that's weird for me to even say.
How would it be weird?
Yay.
You're a very talented person.
Oh, shucks. Thanks.
Anyway, so anyway, Deborah, we can find the book on Amazon. And
Yes, I want to say that if you go to deborahlukovich.com,
uh-huh,
you can get there from there because I hear that Amazon has been really glitchy. And I hear that if you search for my book, you might not find it. But if you put my name in, you'll find it. So if anybody's having any problems, go
yeah,
to deborahlukovich.com because you'll get right to my Amazon page
okay.
from there. Hmm.
So for our Canadian friends, make sure you just heard with that last. If you need to rewind and go back to those directions, because Um, I had trouble finding it through Amazon.ca, but if I went through Amazon.com, it was ready available. The
Yeah.
link that we're going to share in the notes will be to Amazon.com, but
Yeah, so the link that you're sharing, I'll make sure you have the link that just goes directly to my page.
yeah,
Well, although, and then people should get there, right?
yeah, they'll
My
get
Amazon
right there.
page. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little frustrated because at first, also, Amazon was not like people were submitting reviews really quickly and they weren't showing up. And
Mhm.
it took like 10 days. That's not good during a book launch, right? And now, I don't know. Now it's just weird that you can't search for when sex meets God or that it
Yeah.
doesn't show
It-
up. So I'll have to keep an eye on that.
yeah. And I will say this because I think that my review of the book shows up on your website, maybe, but it's not going to show up on Amazon because there was another limitation that we were
Right.
able to get our
Yeah. Now,
review up
are
there.
are you on Goodreads?
Uh, Signing up for that one.
Okay,
So
because
that's another place for people to go. It's Goodreads. Yes.
yeah, so you should be able to leave a review there. So I have some reviews there. People who have the same problem, or, if you don't spend $50 a year in Amazon, and I don't, you can't leave a review, which doesn't seem, even if you buy the book, which is really, corrupt to me. But anyway, those people have left reviews on Goodreads. And soon, next week, my book will be available on bookshop.org. So for people who are boycotting Amazon, bookshop.org, their book sales also go to support local and independent bookstores. So like it's a good alternative to buy books on bookshop.org. The ebook version is available on bookshop.org, but not the paperback yet. So in the next couple of days, it'll be there too. And then in the next couple of weeks, for an e-version, you'll be able to get it anywhere, like Barnes and Noble or any place else you buy ebooks, you'll be able
Yeah.
to get it on those places too.
Oh, good to know. So, anyway, thank you for coming on the show again.
Thanks for
Because
having
I
me.
think this is your third time on my show.
I No, I think it's my second time.
Second time. Am
Yeah.
I adding a time in that I need to actually bring you back for a third one?
There it is. I think that's what the Freudian slip was about. Yep.
Anyway, it's always fun talking to you, and uh, go, please, everybody, go buy When Sex Meets God. It is an awesome book, wonderful story.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, see everybody later.